What drove him crazy was watching people just struggling and working 5, 6 days a week in factories or on the farm or whatever to pay bills, just like we do now. And that's what the other quote, the mass of men's lives are lived in quiet desperation, but they don't know how to get out of it. So what he was trying to say with your quote is there's another way to look at this.
Welcome to Passion Struck. Hi, I'm your host, John R. Miles, and on the show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of the world's most inspiring people and turn their wisdom into practical advice for you and those around you. Our mission is to help you unlock the power of intentionality so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you're new to the show, I offer advice and answer listener questions on Fridays. We have long-form interviews the rest of the week with guests ranging from astronauts to authors, CEOs, creators, innovators, scientists, military leaders, visionaries, and athletes. Now, let's go out there and become Passion Struck. I am absolutely thrilled today to welcome Ken Lizotte to Passion Struck. Ken, so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, John. I'm thrilled too to meet you.
I get a ton of people reaching out to me to be on the podcast, and it's not very often that I get hit and something speaks to me as much as this book that you wrote, Walden for Hire, Business Lessons from Henry David Thoreau does. It was so meaningful for me because Henry David Thoreau has been such an inspiration in much of my work on the likes for me of William James or Viktor Frankl. So much life wisdom. So when I saw this, I knew I had to interview you. But I wanted to ask, what made you feel that now was the best time to bring this book to the world?
Well, you know what? The way you're introducing it speaks to me in terms of what my experience of Thoreau has been. And by the way, I got to start with correcting the way you say his name.
Thoreau.
The way you say his name. Okay. There's two aspects to it. You may already know this, but maybe not all of the folks out there know it. Henry was born David Henry Thoreau. David Henry. And as he got into, I don't know, maybe teen years or 20s, I don't know when it was, he wanted to switch David and Henry. He wanted to be Henry David. And also, he liked the French pronunciation of his last name, which most people say Thoreau, but it's Thoreau. Thorough like thoroughly, thoroughly, or thorough job, or thorough, and as opposed to Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau. See, I have trouble now saying Thoreau because I've gotten so used to Thoreau. So I won't correct you every time you mess up, but it is a bit of a learning curve. But that's the deal with Henry David Thoreau. But here's to answer your question. The thing that I noticed as I spent 10 years as president of Thoreau Farm, which is Henry's birthplace house. It was restored. They were going to tear it down in Concord at one point. And about 25 years ago, a small bunch of Concord citizens said, no, you can't tear that down. Of all the famous writers and thought leaders, let's say, that came out of Concord in the mid-19th century, including, for example, Louisa May Alcott and Ralph Waldo Emerson, none of them were born in Concord. But Henry was. And these people got together and they did all kinds of things to get the town to agree to back this up and then to raise some money for it and all those kinds of things. But the thing is that what you said about yourself in terms of your relationship to him, that this was more exciting than a lot of the topics because it meant something to you. I've seen that in my work with being on the board of trustees again and again. Get somebody who come in, like particularly a worker. We had to have an inspector come in and look at our elevator, for example. And he came in and he had to look at some violations and see if he confirmed them or not, according to the state of Massachusetts. And he said, what is this house again now? And we said, well, this is Henry David Thoreau's birthplace. And he said, Henry David Thoreau. Well, I love that guy. In high school, we read him, and I've never forgot him. And those kind of uncovering people's relationship to him. Nobody wears a badge to let us know this. It's a subculture that's out there. And so I had a feeling that this idea, business lessons from him, would resonate with a certain group of people, of which I would say you represent this relationship with Henry. But beyond that, it didn't come about because I thought this was the right time as much as it was the right time for me. It'd been percolating in my head for a long while. And I just felt like I couldn't believe the more I looked into it. And I saw that for all of books, there has never been a book focusing on Henry as a business mind. And since I also have a business with which I help business leaders, entrepreneurs and business leaders, consultants, I help them become thought leaders by getting their own ideas published, by getting a book published, by getting articles published, by doing speaking, all the things that Henry does or did. Then it came together. These two aspects of my life came together, knowing about Henry and knowing about business and business thoughts. The two of them together, never been a book on that. So here I am.
I love it. So it's going to take me a long time to get used to saying thorough.
Thorough. You will be thorough about it.
Given I've been saying it the other way for 50 years.
We all slip up, including us who are part of this whole thorough subculture. All of us slip up from time to time. So, like I said, it's a learning curve.
Ken, many people picture Thoreau as a solitary philosopher at Walden Pond. Yet what I loved about the way you write about him is that he's a builder, he's a marketer, he's an inventor, he's a teacher, he's a surveyor, he's a profitable entrepreneur whose life spans so many disciplines. So what do you think is the biggest misconception culture holds today, like our modern culture holds today, about his relationship with work and success?
The closest thing to my book is a book titled Henry at Work, and that came out about 2 years ago. Before that, I don't think I could see anything like that book and this book. And I think that with that title, Henry at Work, for a lot of people, it would signify that he did work. The cabin seems to people to be just this sort of easygoing, let me float around the pond and the Walden Woods and that area and just dilly-dally my life away each day. But it's not what he did. Even going to the pond and creating that cabin, he built the whole thing himself, although with the aid of some people to help him do things like raise the roof and things like that. But for the most part, he did it by himself. And what he did inside it was significant too, in terms of significant work, because he spent the 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days that he spent in that cabin at Walden Pond writing. And it was his principal dream career, was for him to be a writer. But at the time, he hadn't published any books yet. In the end, he would end up publishing only 2 books, although a number of his essays would become books. So he really became a successful writer. But plodding away at it day after day in that cabin is what eventually led to that. So you have him working on the manuscript for Walden, and it's said that he went through 7 drafts in 9 years, 7 drafts of Walden in 9 years before he turned it over to a publisher. So the thing about the cabin again is, was he just lolling around in there, or was he really doing something that was not just businesslike, but profitable? And if you remember from that chapter, one of my fellow colleagues, who is an economist at the University of Connecticut named Tom Michelli, He wrote an analysis. He put analysis together about what what really happened in terms of economic output, from Henry during that time at Walden Pond. And he was able to calculate that Henry was actually profitable, even though he didn't get $100,000 for his manuscript then and there. In time, what he did there led to that, not to that specific figure, but it led to a book contract. It led to people buying the book. And after he died, it led more people bought the book, more people, and it's 170 years now. And the book is still selling.
Yeah.
So where did that profit that's being made, how was that created? It was created in the cabin and during that time that he was there. That's the misconception, is that he was a loafer. He didn't really do that much. He did a lot in a lot of other ways too, but I like to think about how that Tom Biselli was able to identify the finances of what happened and the aftermath of Henry being there.
Can I have a fun question for you? If Henry had LinkedIn today, what would surprise people most on his resume?
You might remember that I had a little mock LinkedIn, a couple of pages in the beginning of the book.
That's why I went here.
Yeah, and I put down as much as I could about all the various things that Henry did in his life that were business-like or work-like or whatever. And in the end, I say, how could you not hire this guy? There is just so much there. I think it would be that there would be so much of it, a variety of business-related achievements on his resume. I think that people would expect it to be a much smaller document, and there wouldn't be all that much. And if you take certain things that Henry did that were not the whole of his life, but just a kind of episode in his life, you could look at certain things and say, if this was the only thing he did in his life in a business sense, he could have made a mark in history that way. I'm thinking about the pencil, for example. Okay, his father ran a successful pencil manufacturing firm in Concord. And while Henry didn't spend a lot of time there as he grew up, he was looking at other things that he might do with his life. He did spend some time working for his dad. And he noticed that there was something wrong with even the successful pencils that his dad produced. At that time in America, pencils were very sloppy, unpredictable. We were starting to come out of the inkwell era and into the pencil era. And it wasn't, a pencil might write cleanly and clearly, or it might slop all over the page. There was a problem. And yet that could be considered a successful pencil because it was a state of the art, even though it's not pushing the phrase state of the art. Anyway, Henry had a feeling that there could be something better. So I write in the book about how he decided to do some research, and he went back to Harvard where he graduated, and he went to the library there and he started hitting the books. And he found that in Europe, particularly in Germany and France, pencils were much, much better than in America. So why was this? And he determined what the recipe, as they call it, for the lead inside was, how it was mixed and constructed and all. And he brought that information back to his dad and also created an invention, I'll call it a contraption, that allowed just the perfect kind of ingredient to be created in the pencil factory and then mixed together and used for the lead inside the pencil. He basically reinvented the pencil because his process caused it to be something that it was predictable. You could rely on it. You knew that it wasn't going to get sloppy all over the page. And it then spread to the rest of America. So successful pencil makers, just like his father, that type of pencil went away because of what Henry had done. If that's the only thing he did in his life, that would have been enough to make his mark on history. But it wasn't. It was just one of many things that he did that was remarkable and a contribution.
Yeah, I love that story. I happened to be interviewing Joan London yesterday, and it was interesting because the way she was describing her life is how you were describing Henry's. If people only thought of her of being the anchor for Good Morning America, they'd be missing out on the 3 decades of work she's put into cancer advocacy, dementia advocacy, elder advocacy. But I think it's a common issue that we tend to look at people through a narrow lens instead of seeing the greater impact that they've made. And I think Thoreau was exactly that case, the way you just described it.
I have to tell you that before I got involved with the Thoreau birthplace house, and particularly before I began my research for this book, I didn't know that much about him. I grew up 20 miles from here at a Massachusetts small city called Marlborough, and we never came over to Concord, except to go to Walden Pond once, a crazy beach afternoon. We're all on school buses and just going wild. But as far as really understanding who he was, didn't really understand it. So one of my inspirations, one of my moments of inspiration for this book had to do with that pencil. Because what happened was there's an auction every year the Thoreau Society puts on for all kinds of artifacts and things, various books and recordings and things like that. But I had to put out a winning bid for something. I can't remember what it was, but I had to go over to the Walden Woods, basically artifact shelter, and where they have a lot of things that are up behind glass, and they all have to do with Henry. And the guy who was the caretaker of it said to me, I was looking at this pencil behind the glass. And he said, you know what that is? And he told me the story. And I was like stunned. I had lived in Concord for a number of years at that point. I still didn't know that. So there was something in there that clicked in me then that eventually led to this book. Because it just was leaping out at me that he did that. How could he do that with no training, with no 30 years in the industry or anything like that? That's the sort of thing that, if you go back to the LinkedIn resume, that's the sort of thing that I think people don't know about, because I didn't know about it.
Ken, a lot of my work deals with the bridge between, in some aspects, work, some aspects are personal lives, but then worth and mattering. And as we talked before we went live, I mentioned to you that I was going to try to bring some of my favorite quotes from Thoreau into this discussion.
And you're doing good, John.
And one of the first ones I wanted to bring up is, the price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it.
Yeah.
And I had a question for you about that. When you step back from the business achievements, do you think Henry was ultimately wrestling with a deeper question, not how to succeed, but whether a human life can feel inherently worthwhile?
That's probably what he defined as success. What drove him crazy was watching people just struggling and working 5-6 days a week in factories or on the farm or whatever to pay bills, just like we do now. And that's what the other quote, the mass of men's lives are lived in quiet desperation, but they don't know how to get out of it. So what he was trying to say with your quote is, there's another way to look at this. In the first chapter of Walden, he talks about what he calls the necessaries of life. Not the necessities, but the necessaries. That was his word. And he's looking at things like clothing, for example, and saying, how much clothing how many shirts do we need? How many pants do we need? That sort of thing. And looking at that. And so it's like, if you feel like you need 20 pairs of shoes and 20 pairs of pants, etc., you're going to have to get some money to pay for that. But he felt that in order to really be successful, you could have much less stress, feel much more at one with the universe around you, and spend time on things that you might care about more than some job that's on an assembly line, and let those things go that you need the money for. So that was a work-life balance approach to things. But it's not something that's easy to do, but he was able to do it pretty well. He's certainly a good example of doing it, but it doesn't mean we're all going to run out and live in a cabin for 2 years and just have only one pair of pants. But that was his thinking there.
Ken, I'm glad you brought up quiet desperation, because I have just turned in a manuscript to myself for a book that'll come out in October, where what I try to do in this book is create the modern day infrastructure for how do we in our modern lives overcome quiet desperation. But in the book, I thought a lot about quiet despair. And I can't even tell you how long I thought about this, because as I was thinking about Henry's definition, what he was arguing is that most people live trapped by debt, obligation, and endless labor disconnected from meaning. And his response to it at the time, it was radical simplification of life's necessities, which you go through in the book. Food, shelter, clothing, fuel, movement, things like that. But as I have started to really look at this, and I wanted to ask you about this, I have started to say that today, the mass of men are not living in quiet desperation, they're living in quiet disorientation. And what I mean by that is Henry was really looking at the lives within the walls that contain us. And I think today, with algorithms and the digital world we live in, those walls are becoming translucent. And so to me, the difference is a quiet disorientation is this ache that we feel when we fill every silence that we have with chatter or the pursuit of the next achievement. So it's expanding upon his legacy. I just wanted your thoughts on that expansion.
There's nobody that's a better standard bearer of quiet or natural sounds like Henry. A lot of people don't know that he spent literally 4 hours a day out wandering the woods. That's a significant amount of time. And he saw the factories starting to come in and the noise that accompanied them. And he didn't want any part of it. He had his own issues with technology at that time, which wasn't anywhere near as crazy and disorienting as it is now, but it was starting to happen, right? The train was now just coming in, the telegraph, not much more though, when you think about it, certain kinds of machinery and that kind of thing. But he felt that to be a whole human being, a human being that was in touch with nature and also, and in that way, with their core and what mattered to them and what they felt like they should be doing with their lives. Those are the things that I would say were his successful attempts to escape the disorientation of his life and his surroundings. Disorientation is certainly more simplistic than what we have now, but it mattered to him as well that the quiet was important. When he and his brother started a school in there, I think they're around, both of them in their 20s or so, part of the curriculum was to go out for a number of hours in the afternoon with the kids and experience nature. And if that happens in our school systems today, it's certainly not every day, and it's certainly not 3 or 4 hours, but that was important to him. And Henry had grown up in public schools in Concord, and he had even taught for a very short time there. And he knew the curriculum had to do with rote memory and just the basics of the 3 R's and that kind of thing. And memorization, definitely. He wanted more critical thinkers to emerge from his teaching. And that's the way he did it, get out there. And that's the quiet, I think, that he was able to find. And you could still do that now. You can still go out. Either of us, anyone listening to us right now, can, once this is over, not before, but once this is over, go out, take a walk around nature. And scientific studies these days that indicate that the simple matter of going out for 20 minutes and just looking at trees as you walk down the street or something like that can be a great stress reducer. And it's just so simple. But Henry was locked into that back then.
Thoreau writes that when people live these lives of quiet desperation, I think the critique of the labor system that he was looking at during his time mirrors today's hustle culture and burnout epidemic. And as I think about this and what you were just saying, he's really not diagnosing an economic problem. He's describing what happens when people stop feeling that their lives truly matter. And I think that's what that quote really means. The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it. And
Right.
if you're exchanging it for your fundamental sense of significance, then quiet desperation is the result that you're going to end up with. Do you think simplicity, when it came to Henry's life, when you look at it through this lens, was a productivity strategy, or do you think it was for him a spiritual discipline?
Maybe both. I certainly think it was a spiritual discipline, but you're getting me thinking about it. I think that it felt to him like the most natural way to go about your life, whether that was in the course of, you use the word productivity, was that in the course of doing things or not? Simplicity. He became very successful as a surveyor, which we talk about in the book. But the way he went about it was to be truly dedicated to measuring the plots of land as carefully as he could. Or he had a project in the Concord River where he was plumbing the depths of the Concord River and all of that. It was simple the way he was doing it, but it was also much more intense in the sense of being committed to getting it done right. So in some sense, it's productive and profitable, but in another, it wasn't doing anything that was having 5 different instruments to do the measuring or anything like that.
Ken, as I read your book, and I would do a lot of this at night because I would read it and then I'd spend time contemplating what you wrote because the words are very deep and philosophical. And what I came to the conclusion of is I think his radical simplicity was not withdrawing from the world. I think it was a way that he was trying to protect something that he felt was sacred. And that was the ability to live without constantly proving his worth. And what I took from it is that when life is simplified, space opens for mattering. And that was a huge awakening for me when we examine how he lived his life, because that's what I think he was trying to say.
Yeah, simplicity was something that I think there are a few different quotes from him on simplicity through his life that emerged. I think it was something that he tried to apply everywhere and to profess everywhere to get other people to pay attention to it. It helped me with one of my experiences about 6 months ago when I ended up landing a client who wanted to do a book. And again, that's what I do in my day job. I help business people get books published, even though they wonder if they could ever get a book published. Would anybody ever care about what I write about? That sort of thing. And this particular guy, he was working with a self-publishing firm, and they were having him come back every other day or something for meetings and like this and that. And he was personally using AI, and he was getting all this information and all these graphs and all this kind of stuff. I had to say to him, simplify. You got to simplify this. This is actually more straightforward. You think about your thoughts, you write them down, you reread them, you rewrite them, you get some feedback, but simplify. And apparently it worked in his case because he did come and sign on with me. But it's just that I saw him try and do so many things. AI in particular is a thing nowadays that we get so much information. It's easy to get. You can get it in 20 seconds or whatever. but it's so much information. Do we need all that information? And I think it would have driven Henry crazy and disoriented the hell out of him. But yeah, I think what he would have done in response was get out of the freaking house and go back to Walden Woods and walk around for 4 hours and just forget about it. So
Well, I think this whole idea, Ken, of simplicity is so valuable for people today. And I think what Thoreau was really trying to do is he was trying to say that simplicity is the protection of your soul. And I loved his quote, our life is fretted away by detail. And
yeah,
then he
yeah,
goes, simplify.
yeah,
Because I think what he was saying here is it's a move toward freedom and autonomy and agency over your life.
yeah,
At least that's how I read it.
yeah. I think I put this in the book, but when he said that, it's hard to know if this was a real thing that happened or not. But it's said that Henry said that to Ralph Waldo Emerson, simplify. To which Emerson supposedly said, "Oh, Henry, one simplify would have been enough." So the point I make with that is that it was tough even for him, even in a simple message like that. It's a very insidious kind of thing to be pulled toward complexity and information overload and that kind of thing. But he's our guide to keep reminding us that we should resist it.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to really hit on is I think the world moves in very interesting ways over decades and centuries. And there's this thing called social cycle theory where we end up coming back to patterns. And I think we've been in this pattern now for 4 or 5 decades where more and more people have moved away from entrepreneurship and independence to conventional employment and working for big companies. And in the manuscript, you repeatedly show that Henry intentionally chose entrepreneurship and independence over that type of employment because for him, meaningful work mattered more than lucrative work. When I look at why so many people are disengaged today, I think that is at a crux of a lot of this. I knew I faced this. I remember I was in a Fortune 50 company. I was at the pinnacle of this company. And I just remember one day, I'm like, why am I spending 80 to 100 hours a week making someone else's dreams come true while I'm feeling more and more hollow inside? And I think when I read his work, what I'm thinking is like his approach to business was fundamentally ethical. It wasn't just practical. And his reason for doing it was because of all the reasons I just laid out. So, is it fair to say that Henry's real innovation wasn't just perhaps entrepreneurial independence, but the insistence that your livelihood should never require you to betray your own significance?
Yeah, you're reminding me of a quotation. Beware of enterprises that require you to wear new clothes or purchase new clothes or whatever. His life was all about being what he felt we should all be. So he chose entrepreneurialism because whenever he didn't, it seemed like he got himself into trouble. His job as a teacher, for example, is a good example of it, where here he had just graduated from Harvard and there were no jobs because it was a depression at the time called the Panic of 1837.
Mhm.
And he did somehow land a job as a teacher right here in Concord. But he was assured that he would not have to maintain discipline through corporal punishment. And then there was a supervisor from the school committee that came and sat in the back of the room and watched how he handled things and things where kids were a little wild, this and that. And the guy told him afterwards that you're going to have to do that. You've got to maintain order and quiet. So he said, you got to do this. And Henry, for whatever reason at that moment, said, all right, okay, I'll do it. He called up a couple of students or whatever, and he wrapped them on the knuckles and wrapped them on the wrist and whatever. And they went back to their seats crying. And he felt really bad about it. That day, he felt so bad about it that when school was out, he went to this school committee man's office and he said, I'm quitting. And it was only 10 days that he'd been working there. So it was just that's the sort of thing that he would recognize when he was not being an entrepreneur. And it pushed him more and more in the direction of entrepreneurialism because it just seemed like the most honest and successful in his definition of it, and in such a way that he didn't have to feel the way you were feeling, which was like, what am I doing here all this time? He knew what he was doing here and there. So that worked for him, and he pretty much became an entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur, profitable as well, to the ends of the last phase of his life.
Ken, I realize you didn't intend to do this when you wrote the book, and other people have different interpretations of it. But in a world where we live in today, where 70% of all employees worldwide are disengaged, I think one of the most important insights from your book was that ethical entrepreneurship equals what I call relational mattering in work, meaning it's really the way that cultures today should be designed. Because what Thoreau did was he wasn't rejecting work, he was designing it intentionally so that livelihood, as I interpret it, would not violate conscience. And to me, this is such a profound principle when it comes to mattering, because what I interpret from it is work that requires self-betrayal destroys our sense of mattering, but work aligned with values restores it. And I think so many companies today have these empty values that they put on their walls, and then they're there for like face value, but no one lives it. And I think that's what Henry was trying to say, is you have to live it. And it's something that Marshall Goldsmith wrote about in his book, The Earned Life. You're not going to earn the life that you want until you match your values with your ambitions and your aspirations. And that's what I look at. His entrepreneurship wasn't about profit maximization. It was about moral independence, his ability to live without surrendering his own inner significance in exchange for it. And I think that's one of the most powerful messages from your book.
If we go to surveying for a moment, he believed committing himself all in to surveying in such a way that he could learn what needed to be learned, regardless of what perhaps was set out for him in the beginning. In this thing called the Concord River Project, this was almost like an early climate change type of a research project, because it was looking at the banks of the Concord River and what happened year after year, or what happened when it flooded, and how it might erase fields and farmlands and things like that. But he got hired by the town of Concord to be able to measure the river, all up and down the river. And he spent months working on that. And he would go there in the dead of night, as well as in the dead of day, the light of day, the dead of night, and measure again and again. He wanted to do it right. He wanted to do what was going to bring the information out. And Emerson actually apparently was criticized him for that. He said, "What? He just goes there and he's just all going back and forth, measuring the same thing." But that's what it was all about for him. That was a moral code, you might say. It's the ethicalness of doing it right, as opposed to just maybe doing the minimum. If he was working for somebody and being told what to do, he might have been told, "No, don't go out there at night. Don't do that. We're not getting paid for doing all of that, spending all that time." To him, it didn't matter. He wanted to do the job right. And I think it's a thread that then runs throughout his decisions in his life, all the way through from beginning to end.
Ken, I want to end today's discussion. I'll ask you a question, but I want to end it on this Thoreau quote. Henry writes, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone." And to me, this is a refrain of wealth as freedom from proving, freedom from comparison, and freedom from external validation. If you could leave one thing for the listener today that reading Henry's work, he would want them to start doing differently, what would it be?
I think it would be, I'll extend what I just said about the total commitment that he would put into it, just to make sure the job was going to be done right and not to cut corners. And I think it would be to look at every moment, even like us here talking together, and then people watching and listening and hopefully reading this book. I do that. We're putting ourselves into this deeply so that real learning comes out of it. And this is just us in this hour, but we'll both shut off the technology and we'll go to do something else, whether it's responding to an email or if it's some sort of conversation or whatever it is, all through the day, committing yourself to doing something, not just a job, but doing something, your family or whatever, doing it in a way that feels meaningful, feels like a real contribution to that situation. That's what I think Henry was trying to do all through his life. And the more we can do that, I think the more we clarify a lot of the conflicts that we have and we face.
And I'm going to leave the audience with my own quote here that I would like to leave them with. So many people are disconnected today, and they're most disconnected from themselves and from the experience of life, like you were saying, like walking in the woods, experiencing the beauty. And Henry said, live in each season as it passes, breathe the air, drink the drink, taste the fruit. And what I think he was trying to say is embody your life, slow down, and be present. And I think that is a tremendous message for so many people today.
Right. I think that's exactly what I was trying to say in Henry's words. Breathe what's around you, taste the fruit, really taste it. I think that's what we often don't do. And it shouldn't be a matter of moving on to the next thing, but
right,
being at attention to the thing that you're engaged in at this moment.
Ken, it was such a pleasure to have you and such a fun discussion. Congratulations on your book. And I highly encourage my audience to go out and buy your own copy. It's called Walden for Hire, Business Lessons from Henry David Thoreau. There we go.
You've got to throw yourself into pronouncing it that way from here on.
Yes, I do.
You're about to say it.
Ken, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, John. I had a great time. It's a lot of fun.